again, my project was titled Behind the Burqa, the Quest to Improve Women's Rights in Afghanistan. And I guess a lot of people get really concerned when they're starting this project, and the second paper you'll write in your power class is called the contextual analysis. And for a lot of people, the idea for the research project actually comes out of that paper and what you wrote about there. But in my case, I actually started with a completely different topic. And then I had begun to do some research for the final paper, the research-based argument, realized that what I'd been looking at wasn't something that I was really interested in, and something that I was willing to do tons of reading on. And so I thought about it and realized that I wanted to actually deal with something that related to my life. I should say that I went to an all-girls high school in Los Angeles, and I've always been concerned with women's issues and female rights, so that was definitely part of what triggered my interest in this particular topic. And I also had taken a senior seminar on the Middle East and had read a lot of literature from that region of the world, and so this was sort of a synthesis of my interest in those two topics, so that's how I kind of came up with what I wanted to look at. It's interesting because what I talk about in my paper is I look at the condition of women's rights in Afghanistan according to sort of the context of historical oppression there. That's a little bit about what my project was on, but I wanted to mostly talk about the process. Actually, when I was writing my paper, I realized that I wanted to speak to a certain audience, and to do that, in high school, I feel like a lot of the writing you do is sort of these long, really complicated, windy sentences where you sort of stick in every SAT word you've ever come across, and I learned this the hard way, but when you get sort of to this level, the level that we're at Stanford, it's not about that. It's about, it's incredibly hard to say exactly what you mean, but if you can say that in the clearest, most concise way possible, that's really what I think most people are looking for. And if you can get your point across to almost anyone, and this doesn't mean that you can't use big words, but just to be really clear in what you say is incredibly important. Do not be afraid to go to the library. It's really the most useful place when you're doing this research. I think often it's really tempting just to go on Google and look for an article because you can do it from the comfort of your own dorm room, but the fact of the matter is if you find a book in the Stanford library catalog, you go to the place in the library where it has that book, and I guarantee you will find probably 10 books that are even better than the one that you found. So that's really important. In your research, you should also use primary and secondary sources, and this was something that had kind of confused me at first because sometimes it can be a little bit fuzzy on whether a source is primary or secondary, but it really depends on how you use it. So just to sort of give you an idea of how I think about it, a primary source is really a first-hand account of whatever you're looking at, so statistical data in my case, Amnesty International, human rights reports, interviews of the women involved, which I actually ended up not being able to find, but stuff along those lines, and generally you'll probably be analyzing that data yourself. Then when you get to secondary sources, you're looking at experts' opinion on the subject. I think that the biggest problem I had, besides realizing that my original thesis had been completely off, was definitely trying to formulate my own voice. And that's something that's just so crucial when you're writing this paper, because it's easy to find a book in the library, to read it, and what the author has wrote is so compelling that suddenly you start thinking like this author, and suddenly your idea is not your own, and your thesis just happens to be one word off from what that person had written in the book that you read. So be careful when you're doing that. It's really difficult, but make sure that you have your own idea and that you draw upon other experts and scholars to add to the point that you're making. So make sure that you really distinguish your voice and have your own point that you want to make. I think the last two things that were really helpful in my research, one was that I kept a research log. Now, this was basically a spiral notebook where I kept track of all of the sources that I looked at. So I kept a working annotated bibliography. I'm sure your professors have either talked about that or will be talking about it. But That way I could look through my notes and I could see what books I'd read and what information I'd found in them, so I could think back and it sort of jogged my memory and I could know if I wanted to use it. Also, I could diagram my thoughts and organize the path that I wanted my paper to take. It's tedious, but it's really worth it, I would say. And finally, I think we're sitting in the place that was most instrumental in helping me write this paper, Stanford Writing Center. I came here 3 times and worked with a professor. And it wasn't so much, I wouldn't say that the professor that you meet with will help you write the paper, because this is a 12 to 15 page paper. There's no possible way that they'll be able to sit down and sort of go through the whole thing with you, but it really helped for me to organize my ideas, to realize what I wanted to say, and just to have someone to brainstorm with, because as much as my friends love me, I don't think they want to discuss, women's rights in Afghanistan with me for an hour, so this is a really helpful resource. But in conclusion, I would say most important piece of advice is to do something that relates to you, that you're interested in. This is a really tough project, I'm not going to lie to you, and it's a long process, but incredibly rewarding. So good luck.